Our third and final argument for the evening is the argument from morality. It goes like this. Premise 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Now, we have to kind of define our terms here. What do we mean by morality? Morality concerns actions that are praiseworthy or blameworthy. What do we mean by moral values and moral duties? Moral values tell us what is right and wrong. Moral duties tell us what we ought to do, namely that we ought to do good and avoid evil. But the distinction there is that there are lots of things that are good, but that doesn't mean we have to do all of them. Okay? It would be good if I became a firefighter, or a teacher, or a doctor, or a priest, or whatever. But just because all those things would be good doesn't mean that we have to do every good thing all the time. Instead, our state in life determines what kinds of moral duties we have and to whom. Okay, but to make sense of the argument, we first have to show that morality is objective and that moral relativism is self-defeating. So the easiest way to do this would be to consider an action that is always and everywhere wrong. So take, for example, the thought of torturing children for fun. Torturing children for fun. Have you ever met anyone who didn't object to the notion of torturing children for fun? Neither have I. And if we did meet such a person, someone who thought it would be okay to torture children for fun, we wouldn't just say, well, that's his truth and I have my truth. You know, we wouldn't say, he can have his opinion, I'll have mine. No, we would vociferously, emphatically object that there is no circumstance under which torturing children for fun could ever be morally permissible. Okay? Now, some people might argue that these so-called moral facts, such as it's always wrong to torture children for fun, some people might argue that they have a purely natural origin. Maybe that they have, they're part of our evolutionary instinct, or that there's some broadly agreed upon social contract, rather than having a supernatural origin in God. But on the contrary, we can show that these moral values and duties must have a supernatural origin for them to be truly objective. As the famous English author C.S. Lewis says in his essay, The Poison of Subjectivism, unless the measuring rod is independent of the thing measured, we can do no measuring. So let's take the first of those two objections about human instincts. It's true that we have instincts that are related to morality. It's true that as a species we've developed instincts that lead us toward the good and away from evil. But morality can't just be one of those instincts. In his book, Mere Christianity, Lewis makes an analogy to playing the piano, in which the keys of the piano represent the many moral choices that we are confronted with, and the songbook tells us which keys to play. For us to be able to play the music correctly on the keys of the piano, the music cannot itself be one of the keys. Lewis writes, supposing you hear a cry for help from a man in danger, you will probably feel two desires. One, a desire to give help, due to your herd instinct. The other, a desire to keep out of danger, due to the instinct for self-preservation. But you will find inside of you, in addition to these two impulses, a third thing, which tells you that you ought to follow the impulse to help and suppress the impulse to run away. Now, this thing that judges between two instincts, that decides which should be encouraged, cannot itself be either of them. You might as well say that the sheet of music which tells you at a given moment to play one note on the piano and not another is itself one of the notes on the keyboard. The moral law tells us the tune we have to play. Our instincts are merely the keys. A second objection to the supernatural nature of the moral law is the claim that morality is just a special sort of social phenomenon that all the members of a given society happen to agree upon, as though morality were like fashion. But if that were the case, we could never say that a society has made moral progress over time. On that objector's view, we could never say, for instance, that slavery was morally wrong. All we would be able to say on that view is that slavery used to be the fashion then and isn't the fashion now. But that's absurd. because enslaving innocent people is always wrong. And as the saying goes, right is right even if no one is doing it, and wrong is wrong even if everyone is doing it. This argument from the existence of moral facts is also a testament to God's character. If God is the source of all moral goodness, then he himself must be perfectly good. Now, at this point, there comes up a famous dilemma that's often raised alongside this issue called the Euthyphro dilemma, which takes its name from one of the dialogues of Plato. The dilemma in question basically says, is an action good because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because it is? Now, this is a tricky question to answer, because if you say that an action is good just because God says so, that makes morality arbitrary, and it makes God just a dictator, and it wouldn't prevent an evil action from becoming a good action if God decided to change his mind. Now, of course, we know that God doesn't change at all, so I use that phrase very loosely. But on the other hand, if you say that God has to consult some kind of other authority in order to say what kind of actions are good or evil, it would seem that God isn't actually God, and maybe we should be worshiping whomever he had to consult instead. Luckily for us, we don't have to give either answer, because the Euthyphro dilemma is a false dilemma. Morality does not come merely from God's will, nor from a source higher than God, but from God's own nature. A thing is not good because God says so, and God does not say so because a thing is good. Rather, a thing is good because God is goodness itself. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, God's almighty power is in no way arbitrary. In God, power, essence, will, intellect, wisdom, and justice are all identical. Nothing, therefore, can be in God's power which could not be in his just will or in his wise intellect.